What I go by Greg, but I want to make sure I call you folks the right thing as well.
Well, I like to make things really confusing, so I have two names. And so if you'll notice in the chat, it says Roxanne, and then on the podcast, it says Luvly.
I call you folks
so
the right thing as
either
well.
one of those is fine. Rox is probably the easiest.
Rocks. Okay. Okay. Well, Chris keeps popping up on my Skype, so that might be easiest.
Oh, okay, cool. I'm going to actually give it a minute or two until we get a couple of people in here, and then we'll go ahead. So where are you, Aendam?
I am in, not.
Oh, okay. Okay.
We'll see how well my computer handles all this. I've got a lot of things running right now, so you can do it. You can do it, little laptop. I trust in you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen just so we can make sure that that's actually going to work. And that means I have to remember how to do this. Let's see. Plus share screens. This screen. Okay, so theoretically, I'm showing a screen of our terrain editor right now.
You are.
Yeah, I can see that on one of my computers, and it's what, about a 10-second delay when Aendam picks it up?
Yeah, I don't know if you want me to show this or not, so I'm just...
No, I think it's all right. I can see it on the Skype screen as well. That's actually really cool.
Yeah. So wow, I didn't tell you like my goals here. So yeah, I want to demonstrate our main level editing tool called Atlas as part of a walk through the pipeline of how we make assets, assemble them together into what we know as a zone, and export that out so we can see it in the game.
Oh, okay.
And if things go really spiffy, I'm even going to make a tower. I'll make a really quick, really low detail tower, so folks can see a new asset being made live. No pressure, right? And yeah. We'll see how that rolls.
Well, okay. Well, how about I get this thing started officially? We're 1 or 2 minutes after 6, so I'll get it started with official introductions. So welcome to Dark Age of Camelot, the Knights podcast. My name is Luvly, and I'm here with my fellow knight and designated streamer Aendam. Joining us tonight, lurking in the background, is John Thornhill, our producer. And our very special guest is artist Greg Grimsby. Welcome, Greg. We're super excited.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here, and kudos on saying my last name correctly, because it normally trips up people.
Thank you. It sounds kind of British, but you don't sound British. Is it a British name?
It is. There's actually a town in England called Grimsby, and that's what I'm named after. So you're spot on. You're spot on. Yeah.
Go me. Okay, so for tonight, we're going to actually be doing something completely different. We're going to be switching back and forth between our regular Twitch stream that you're looking at right now, and then we're going to go to Greg's actual desktop, and he's going to be able to give us an insider's peek of what it's like to be an artist and how he creates things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just turn it right over to Greg, and as I see questions and so on, I'll try and pick those up out of the chat. I also see Carol's in here for a little bit, our community lead. Hi, Carol, hiding over there. So Greg, off you go.
All right, awesome. So I've had the privilege of working on Camelot for quite a while. I first worked on the product when we did the New Frontiers and the Catacombs expansion. So that brings us back quite a ways.
Oh, wow, that's really far back.
Yeah, and then I had a little hiatus interruption of this thing called Warhammer Online, and I was the art director on that. So I wasn't able to contribute to Camelot for quite a while, but awesomely and amazingly, I'm able to once again do some Camelot stuff, and it's been awesome doing visual effects and statues and terrain and new and awesome things which players don't know about yet, but soon enough, right?
And keep lighting.
Keep lighting and all that stuff. So it's great because there's a lot of ways that an artist can contribute. So anyway, that's just a little bit of my background, and what I want to demonstrate today for everybody to see is just really briefly how we assemble together a zone, or at least make changes to a zone. I can't build a whole zone in an hour. Otherwise, wow, we would have a whole lot more content than we do. But I'm going to make some changes to the zone so you get an appreciation for the kinds of tools that we have and our considerations. And I hope it's kind of like seeing, behind the curtain, the magician's curtain, and that it'll be fun for everybody. And if things are really well, I want to make a new asset. So I'm going to start.
Sounds great.
Yeah, well, cross fingers because game development is game development. So the first couple of times I went through this, it went fine, and then one time it broke horribly. So we'll
that'll give us an appreciation for how hard it is for you to do stuff, because it doesn't always work exactly the way you want.
No, it doesn't. So that's one of those skills you kind of build is, why did this break? How do I debug this? And kind of deconstruct your process to see if you can figure out where things went wrong. So I'm going to start off with showing you our terrain editor.
Okay, so do you need Aendam to switch over to your desktop? Because the timing is great. He just died. So I think he's ready.
Segue.
Yeah, he planned that. Okay, I've actually got you guys on my laptop and on my regular computer, so I think there's going to be about a 10-second delay, so we're just waiting for that to pop up. While we're waiting, there it is. Greg, I just did want to ask you, as an artist, when you're creating this stuff, you're doing the terrain and the models as well, like all the moving stuff and the terrain and all that?
Well, typically, game teams are large, and if they're making a new product, you might have 30, 40, 50, hundreds of artists, and the roles are very specialized. So you would not generally have one person who is doing everything. It's not until you get to small teams or indie development where one artist wears so many hats and they really affect a lot of the process. So again, I've done a lot of Camelot stuff over the years, so I'm pretty familiar with most of the ways things are done. And so I'll try to call out when I'm demoing this, like what typically would be handled by a specialist. Okay. Just so you get a sense of, that's pretty awesome. How can I do that for a living, or what have you? I'll call out those individual disciplines. Typically, terrain editing is done by an artist who specializes in terrain, because you got a lot of it, miles and miles of it, and it takes a lot of time, and you have to have an eye for landscape, really. So, all right, I'm going to...
I see it now.
This is our terrain editor called Atlas, and we've had this in various incarnations and versions since the very beginning, although it was called something else originally. And it's similar in a lot of ways to the kinds of terrain editors you might see in the game engines that are available now, like Unity 3D or Unreal, because this is a place where content, and when I say content, I mean art, sound, isn't built, it's assembled together into the player's experience. So we have this, which should be very familiar zone, although perhaps from a point of view that's not so familiar. One of our zones, which demonstrates that assemblage of assets together. And I'm going to develop an area off on the zone there's not a whole lot of stuff going on there. So
now that looks familiar. I recognize that.
Yes. And I'm going to imagine that perhaps a weary traveler or band of warriors might want someplace else to stop and get something to drink than just this one lonely tavern. So, and what I'm really doing is looking for an excuse to populate a different area. So I'm going to kind of maneuver my way over to another part of the map and going to place a tavern. We'll try, well, let's see here. No. Let's put one right here. That should work. And I'll wait for the screen to kind of catch up there to my dialogue. So, as I hinted at, this editor is where things are assembled together. It allows us to edit the terrain, and by edit I mean we can paint the different materials onto the terrain, the grass, the rock, mountain-looking stuff. We can place trees, and of course we can place the buildings.
So when you
I mean we can paint the different materials onto the terrain, the grass, the rock, mountain-looking stuff. We can place trees, and of course we can place the buildings.
So when you create a building, do you like make a building and then kind of grab that building and put it where you want it, or do you create the building on the spot that you want the building to show up?
Oh, awesome question. So it depends upon whether that building is one of your repeated pieces that's everywhere. So a tavern isn't necessarily built to fit on location. It's meant to go like lots of places. And so in that case, you're going to build that asset like a tavern, and you're going to understand that it can go anywhere. So you take that into account, and you probably build it first. And then your terrain editor is going to have it in their list of objects. So I'm going to pull up the actual fixture editor here and let that cast its way through to everybody. The fixture editor is where we can bring in assets and add them to our library of hundreds and hundreds of models we've made over the years. And then from that library, whether it's a tavern or whatever, I can begin to populate the scene. Now, in some cases, we build an object and we know exactly where it's going to go. And so that's a little different way of answering your question. Like the Camelot wall, for instance, there's only one wall meant for that certain orientation by the river. So that's a much more handcrafted for the location kind of piece, and there's a lot of going back and forth between an editor like this and our modeling tool, which is Max. And this is fairly standard in environment art, where some pieces really integrate into the world, and other ones might as well be trees. They can go practically anywhere.
I was going to say that about trees, because it looks like you have very specific little trees. And I know when I was, decorating my house, I would pick certain trees and then I would intersperse other trees so that it looked a lot more natural. So I'm assuming that's what you do with your models. You have a specific tree and then you populate and drop some other ones in there.
Yeah, we have a certain look that we strive for each zone, and I'm sure our players have noticed the trees that we kind of reserve for each of the realms, and so they have their own kind of palette of the kind of tree and the color of tree. And so in this in this zone, certainly we have a set of trees that we use and that we like and that we feel fit. They're all deciduous trees for the most part, and the colors blend well. So I think since the screen hopefully is up, I'm going to go ahead and place a new tavern here. And I browse my library of assets, and I pick the one that I want. And you can just see from the list, which has been showing for a while, we have lots of stuff, campfires and wells and, whole keeps. And they're just models. And I'm going to hit our Create Pictures button, and I'm going to place that sucker down. And then I'll make any changes, and I'll make a series of changes here and kind of talk about what I'm doing. So we got to fix the scale so we can manipulate how big something is. So one of the fun things we're working on.
That's awesome.
Well, I can make this thing hundreds of feet tall, but after a certain size, of course, it breaks. It doesn't like literally explode, but its scale is no longer human, and its texture no longer holds up. And these are the considerations that we have as designers and artists. And that's that these textures
there it is.
Can only support a certain amount of size before which they get really pixelated.
Okay, so that looks like a skeleton to me without any of the textures on it.
Well, we have the wire. There you go. We have the wireframe, which just helps us to know that what we've selected, and that's that white outliney kind of look. Mm-hmm. So I scale the object, and any rotations that I need to make. So, for instance, our tavern here, if I need to have it orient to the road better, I can rotate the tavern.
I have actually a question from Stormwell asking if you can place that same tavern in Shrouded Isles or TOA as well. Or is it just for this zone?
It can be placed in a lot of places, although the art system and the rendering system does have a distinction between certain locations. Cities are different technologically than terrain zones, than dungeons, and these harken back to architectural decisions and challenges from over a decade ago. So in spirit, yes, we can place most buildings pretty much anywhere within those kind of limitations. And this building being one of those cases, although this is one of our revamped ones that we revamped around the time we did Catacombs, and so we have really old models and that would be probably more at the SI level of detail, and then we have this tavern which was revamped to bring it up to more of our current expectations of triangle count and animation and particle effects and all that.
So when you have, say, an expansion like TOA, is that like a different program entirely, or I'm kind of trying to wrap my brain around it. When you say different models, so TOA had a different look, but it's all still one big Dark Age of Camelot program, if you will. Does that make sense?
It's all one big program, and when we certainly have had graphical updates, and we've added features to the engine, and most players have looked through and they know their graphical settings, and there's like the old water and there's the old characters. Right. Yeah, and that's tied to the renderer. But it's also just the complexity of the art and how sophisticated it is, how much memory it takes up, how detailed it is, and so it is one Camelot now. Mm-hmm. So we pretty much can build to the kinds of detail levels that I hope look good.
So in the old part, you can make things more detailed. Like they were showing on the Herald that you were doing some improvement to the landscaping. They were showing that you were doing much nicer textures and stuff. And it doesn't matter what area of the game it's in, you're able to do that.
To some degree, yes. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We do have some systems that are the way they are, and they have limitations, and we have to work within those limitations. And I think in some ways that's a good thing, because we can't assume that every one of our players is running super modern hardware. Perhaps one thing that they enjoy is being able to use certain computers that they have. So, that plus the fact that we try to keep that compatibility for all of our players. Reins us in from going crazy with our complexity of our objects.
So what are all these lines I'm seeing? What are those lines on the ground?
So this is the surface of the terrain, and I'm going to get this this tavern to sit better in the world. We don't just place stuff and leave it. We have to consider, well, it's there, but is it in a pleasing location? And so I'm just going to do a bunch of terrain editing, and this is kind of like patting my head and rubbing my tummy. I'm going to try my best to answer questions and to do some sculpting, talk about the tool and what I'm doing, and but that wireframe helps me to know where the actual polygons of the terrain are in relationship and how they intersect with the building. So, the first thing I'm going to do to get this tavern to sit more correctly is I want to find out what its height is in the world, and then I'm going to go over and adjust the terrain to that height. So you'll see that update in just a few seconds, and you'll see me actually making adjustments to the terrain to make sure that building doesn't float or doesn't have an overhang.
Okay, while you're doing that, I see Snoopy is asking who had the idea of the catacombs models, and are they still employed? And then this other part of it will be for John, I think. Will we be seeing the underground keep today? So we'll do the first part first. The catacombs models. Was that you, or look at the ground? That's really neat.
So no. We knew as a team back around that catacombs time frame that we were continuing to improve the look of I'll just call it the expansions. So TOA came out, and we pushed the triangle count and the texture resolution, aka we're trying to make cooler stuff. And as an art staff did that, besides the programmers telling us to stop because we were wanting to break the game, but we kept doing it. And luckily computers are much better now. And then same thing with catacombs. We were really pushing the limits of what we could do and what hardware could do at that point in time.
Meaning your own stuff versus my stuff at the receiving end, or both sides of that?
Mostly were the scenes that we were making in the game, were they going to run well? Were they on everyone's machines? Were they going to have a good experience? And so we were trying to walk that line and adding detail to the models, but still having the players enjoy the art. And so back to the catacombs question, we as a team decided that we needed to go back to the rest of the world and try to bring up the assets to the quality that a lot of the expansions were achieving. And no, we haven't done everywhere because there's a lot of game. But we tried to hit the places that were really dear to players, that were really like landmark important locations. So we're talking like the classic zones and all the fixtures Fixtures is our term for buildings and props. Where those fixtures are being used. So it wasn't my decision. It was a team decision, and yes, everything you're seeing actually here in my screencasting is our Catacombs level or sophistication of model, and those are the standards that we've kind of used going forward. Our newest stuff is going to continue to be more and more detailed and complex within, again, the consideration of what we think all of our players are going to be able to enjoy, not just those with the awesome machines. And then John can answer the other question. Well, I do some terrain painting, so.
Okay.
Yeah, so actually I can tag on to the first question too with the Catacombs models. I know a lot of players just like old icons and new icons, and the models are probably less of a sticking point than the icons, but we actually have some metrics on that, and over 70% of our users use the new Catacomb models. So while some players might enjoy the Atlantis models, by every metric we have, the Catacombs models were a huge success, as well as the fixture updates we all did that Greg was just talking about. And then for the Underground Keep, we have no plans to show that tonight, but we're pretty close to showing it off. We'll have a video up for you in the next couple of weeks, probably, to showcase the whole island and the Underground Keep. And I saw a question on Twitch about the Cobalt Undercity waterfall asset, and it's not a ripoff of that exactly, but you guys will be happy.
So that's funny because the Cobalt Undercity Catacombs, that was one of the regions that I worked on. So I feel that I have license to use that stuff if I want to, because I made a good bit of it. We had a really talented team working on that expansion, and I know we all look back on that work, and I still think some of those locations hold up really well artistically, and that's good to be able to say as an artist.
Well, you've got a nice, sorry to interrupt, you've got a very nice compliment from Tricky saying that it's probably some of the best art in the game. So there you go.
Yeah, thank you. We really explored some pretty wild ideas in Catacombs, from the Veil Rift to the Cobalt Undercity to the Midgard, burial ships. I mean, there were some really fun ideas that were really tough, super tough as a team to pull off back then, because they were really complex. But I appreciate the thoughts on that stuff. Well, I'm about ready to proverbially break the game here, or I hope not.
Okay.
I'm going to try to export our lovely new tavern into the actual, I should say our test client. Of course, we have a test client and server that we use for our testing purposes, so that our testing experience doesn't impact the player's experience. And that's what my tool chain's all hooked into right now. So I'm going to go ahead and, since I've demonstrated just the smallest bit of terrain editing, and if people weren't really picking it up because I was being so subtle, I don't have to be that subtle. The terrain editor allows us to make some pretty bold changes to the way the terrain looks. This is what they call a height mapped based terrain, and again, it's a very, very common way of handling terrain, especially big, huge sections of terrain. So I'm doing all kinds of nasty terraforming here just to get the point across. We have smoothing tools, so we can smooth stuff. And I do want to refer a comment back. Someone had given some kudos to the look of this revamped terrain zones that we're looking to release, and I have to give credit to our one of our new artists, Tori, who's been working really hard in repainting those new areas, and she's done a really good job. Okay, so I'm going to hit the magic export button here, and this might take a few minutes, and so maybe players aren't our viewers aren't watching me staring at an export screen. If you want to swap to some other screen, that would be fine by me. Or you can stare at my export bar.
Stare at it, waiting for it to work.
Yeah,
We could.
Awesome.
Oh, Aendam, great. Well, with this thing with all the lines on it and stuff, I think Kreider asked a question a little ways back about pet pathing. Are all these lines what contributes to pet pathing?
No. Well, okay. So our pathing system takes into consideration a lot of things. One of those things being, yes, the terrain. And so this polygonal representation of the terrain, it does use that terrain, but more important really is, or more difficult actually, are the fixtures, the buildings, because they have indoors and outdoors in a lot of cases, and it's just an arbitrary collection of angles, and that requires a good bit of sophistication in terms of, one, how we create the art to imply what's walkable surface and what's not. And then in our pathing tool, which actually generates, this is where pets or monsters can go, things that are controlled by the server. Where can they go and where can they not go? So it's a pretty complex system. And then we get into things like doors and animated things, and
And what about when you? I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's not fun. It's a challenge getting pathing to behave itself. But we have a pretty good understanding of what things make pets unhappy at this point, and we're always looking at ways and improving that as well.
Well, I think for me, just seeing that terrain done with the lines, of course, when I'm looking at the terrain, all I see is what Aendam's looking at right now, and it's like, well, what's the problem? And of course, there's very little appreciation for what actually goes into that, and I think that that makes a big difference for us to be able to actually see what it is that's underneath the textures that we're seeing. Now, what about when you have the things that can fly? That's kind of neat. How do you guys do that? Like the bugs that can fly us from the NPCs that you take for a ride. How do you create those that they're flying up in the air?
Yeah, save me, John, save me.
It's actually not something I can answer very technically, but that's all code magic. Basically, the pathing and everything is all behind the scenes, even from this tool that you're seeing or you saw on the screen, and it's just determined kind of with in tandem with the art you're seeing, but mostly on the server. It just kind of lines up in the grids, and mobs can follow along where we've laid out. They can follow along, and that was actually one of the things we focused on smoothing out in the Frontiers with the last patch, and hope to continue to do that as we go forward.
All right, I think I'm about ready to show some actual modeling process of where we build stuff inside of 3D Studio Max. So,
okay, I'll go ahead and swap.
Awesome. Again, I'm super multitasking here, so this might be a little non-responsive, but we will
It's been pretty
persevere.
awesome so far. I'm pretty impressed.
Awesome.
So while we're switching back and forth here, how do you guys do? I'm kind of going off on a bunny trail here. How do you guys do shadows? Is that just like one thing that you go, okay, here's the shadow and the sun is moving across the sky and all that? Or is that, how do you do that? I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because I'm a firm believer that lighting has probably the biggest impact on our perception of whether something looks high fidelity or not, than almost anything. And so our lighting happens in two ways. We have, and I have an actual screenshot that I brought up here, which I don't know if it's up on the cast or not, but we have
With
shadows.
your tower? Yeah.
Yes.
I see your tower. Mm-hmm.
So, disclaimer: this tower, I'm going to demonstrate how this is made, and it's like really, really bad, but it's quick and demonstrates some principles. And in this case, it shows the dynamic shadow. So we have dynamic shadows, which are cast from our fixtures and from the character models, and those do change with time of day. And that's important because the shadows help ground objects into the world, and without these shadows, they would float. And so it's not just about, the realism of the scene. We need shadows for things to be realistic. It's just as much about is the world cohesive, and do things feel like they belong in the world? And that's where shadows can really help. And towards that, we have two kinds of, we have another way we handle shadows, and that's we can generate shadows on the objects themselves inside of the modeling software. So we'll go inside of our 3D software, Max, and we'll render out what's called a light map, and that gets cast onto the object. I actually can pull up one and show what this looks like theoretically. And it's those two techniques in conjunction. It's the dynamic lighting, which gives you the cast shadows and things feel like they react to time of day. And then there's the light maps, which are fixed to one time of day. But the shadows are what we call ambient occlusion, which is a fancy pants term for just soft lighting, the kind of lighting you might get on a cloudy day, not raking shadows. It's just shadows, and you actually can kind of see it even in this tavern. There's some shadows under the eaves and the timbers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Those are pre-done by the artist, and so those two in combination give us a pretty good result. And light mapping is a technology that's pretty ubiquitous now, although it certainly has evolved and has become sophisticated.
So it's an actual program or something, because the sun is moving in our sky and the shadows are following it, and I just think that's amazing. That's just amazing to me. So that's a program that y'all are doing to make that happen.
Yeah, that's part of the rendering engine. So the rendering engine is rendering those shadows based upon the light source, which of course is the sun, and it casts those. Those are called shadow maps, and I think I have a light map here somewhere. I would hope I have one in here somewhere. Okay, here's one.
Okay.
And I'll bring this over to my screen. It's not going to look like much, but that should come up in a couple seconds. And the light maps look like, they look like uncolored shadowed surfaces, and you can see the. Here
it comes.
You can see the dark. This is actually one of the cake toppers. You can see the title of the file there. This is one of the cake toppers to the keeps, and we have just hundreds of these files that we pre-render so that we get the good dimensional look to the shadows, and we can control them. Because artists love to control stuff. Yes, we do. And we control the lighting and make sure it looks awesome. And that file actually gets associated with that model, and there you go.
Okay, well, I'm going to take you off down another bunny trail because I see a good question from Ralvain. Can we expect any new models for NPCs, armors, or weapons anytime soon?
Yes.
There you go. It's a yes or no question.
Yes. Hint, hint. Nudge, nudge. Wink, wink. Legendary weapons for the new armor, the new magic types, not the old ones.
There you go. There's your answer. Okay, Greg, off you go on what you were doing.
Okay, and I'll let John decide if he wants me to tease one of those visual effects or not. But
Yeah, go ahead, man. Sure.
Oh, off script. We're going off script. Danger.
Teasers.
Alrighty. Yeah.
You can save that for later if you want. You don't have to do it right now.
All right, that'll make people stay.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
Keep watching, and I might show you visual effects stuff. Okay. So I've had the screen up for a while with just a screenshot of the cheesy tower, and I'm going to walk you through super quick how we model something like that. So given the delay here, I'm just going to do stuff and keep on talking, and hopefully even with the delay, because things will take a couple of seconds for me to do anyway, you'll be able to kind of get the picture of what I'm doing. If I were to make that kind of tower, there's lots of different ways of going about it. But here I am in 3D Studio Max, and this is a really old version of Max because it's what we had back in the day, and it's what our exporters that export out to our game format works on. So yay, Max 8. So yes, if you know what version we're on right now, which is 2016, you can chuckle and go, haha, Greg has to use 10-year-old software. It's okay. I make do. So I'm going to pretend that this is going to be one chunk of my wall for my tower, and what I can do is I can actually start to manipulate the structure of the polygons, and I'm using the term polygon. It means the triangles. It's the 3D surface representation of the things in our world. Everything boils down to triangles. It's the lowest, simplest way that we can define a 3D surface. Obviously, a vertice, it's a point in space. It has no volume, and 2 points make a line. But again, a line doesn't describe area, and so the polygon is that lowest form that we can use to start to construct stuff. So our modeling software is going to allow us to manipulate those things, and so I just can move verts around and manipulate them to start to create the shape. And I'm going to load up. I'm not going to do all this on the fly because it's a little too hard to do while I'm speaking, but I have this in various stages. So this next stage, I've taken some of those vertices and I've maneuvered them around to places where I want the silhouette or the section of the tower to change. And so we have some crenellation that I've created here, and that was just a simple matter of taking one of these and extruding it up, and that gives us...
So you're pulling from stuff that you've already created in the past.
Yeah, I made this a few days ago.
Okay.
And the textures, these are textures taken from the Frontiers Keeps. So
okay.
And I've just applied some of those textures really quickly, and I've got wall texture, and I've got some trim textures, and just to be clear, a texture is an image. It's a graphic that the artist creates, whether this texture is a photo that's been manipulated or whether it's been hand-drawn. Most of the character art is all going to be hand-drawn because you're not going to go find a photo of a dragon. So, yeah, you got to hand-draw it. But when you get to our buildings and things, we have the luxury of being able to go and take a picture of a really cool wall. Although with that said...
That's interesting. I never knew that. That's really cool.
And even with that ability to take a picture of a real wall, we still fake it half the time, and we have to make up details that still don't exist, so we can sculpt and create structures as we want. We're not limited to what we can get in terms of photo reference. So this is stage 2, where I've put on a basic texture, and I've done a little bit of manipulation of how those textures apply to the surface.
And Kreider is just adding to this, asking if you want to change the looks, can you apply a specific skin to an already existing keep?
Yes, and there's different ways that we could do that. We could do that in this kind of modeling software where I would change the materials. I'll bring up the material palette, and you can let that sync up with you folks. And we can assign new textures here, and then I could export it out. And we certainly could do it that way. The keeps, of course, are dynamic things. They change ownership, and the game engine uses a series of lookup tables to determine, oh, this texture is the Hibernian texture for this level of keep. And it's a nasty, ugly spreadsheet, but it does allow the keep look to be data-driven without us having to export out all these different iterations, and so that saves memory as well. So we can do it two ways, and I guess which way we do it would depend upon whether it needs to dynamically change in the game, or are we just making a variant of it for the static world, like a vine ivy covered version of this tower. It's probably not a dynamic thing, so an artist would just draw it.
So the dynamic thing is when we're trebbing a hole in the wall, that wall texture is going to change as the hole starts to go through the wall. Is that what you mean?
Absolutely. Yep. That's pretty much it. So here the tower, I've placed a modifier. I'll go down and you can kind of see how this came about. I had a bunch of straight wall sections, and then I bent them and did some deformations to them to get the shape I wanted. And then there's so many ways of doing this, and every artist has their own way that they're comfortable with. And there's some shortcuts I took just for demoing sake, but we're starting to get kind of towery here. And I'm going to go to the next phase.
Now we have Python asking I don't know what bump maps are, but what about bump maps to make the stones look 3D? What are bump maps?
So bump maps and or normal maps is a way of creating false surface information that's not actually in the model. And if you were to take a close look at this tower, and I've zoomed in here, and once it syncs up, you'll see that there's a lot of implied surface information, but that's not backed up by the triangle. So these little metal rings, of course, are not there. Any of the kind of ins and outs of the rock are just there in the texture. So bump maps and normal maps are a way of interacting with the lighting engine to make these actually look more 3D.
Oh, okay.
The calculations of the lighting actually make it appear that those details are real. That's my description of it. We do very little of it in Dark Age of Camelot. We have some special effects that use bump maps. Some of the slimes and some of the weapons have limited use of bump maps, but we have to back up and take a look at the history of Camelot and when it came out, and no one was using bump maps back when Camelot came out, and you can kind of reach a point where it would be really difficult to go back and retroactively fit them into the world. It would be virtually impossible. And would it be worth it? I don't know. Certainly things would look more 3D, but at the expense of what? Not getting done. No new armors, or no new visual effects, or no new encounters, just for the sake of making things look bumpy. And
I think, honestly, I think our things look pretty 3D. I mean, given, I just think that looks 3D to me.
Well, and that's a great point. And ultimately, it can make things look even more 3D, but what's 3D enough? What's 3D enough for our game at this point?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a good question. This last stage that I've got is I have an actual collision volume that I've created. So I have the 3D model, and then I have the collision representation of it, which is a simpler version. And we want the collision models which determine where the player can go, what they can climb, what they're going to bump up against, and these are also used by the pather to determine the same things for the server-controlled objects. And we want those to be as simple as we can get them because it's really complex to figure out collision. Even your character just walking around on stuff, and when you're mouse picking and things in the world and clicking on monsters and clicking on doors and stuff, if the collision system is not efficient, it can crush performance. So we have always made hand constructed collision models, and these also allow us to get rid of things like steps. If you were walking up steps and you just used the steps as the collision model, your character would go bump, 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 bump up the step. So we take those and we make ramps, so you just go gracefully and smoothly up the steps instead of having this stuttery train wreck going up steps. So we can solve or help some things to make the camera and the player maneuver through the world more gracefully. And we also can use them to keep players from doing naughty player things involving
that they're not supposed to be doing.
Yes, collision and sneaky stuff. So we have ways of stopping that as well. So it's all about controlling the collision models.
Is there any way you can help when I'm driving for me to not run into trees?
Make smaller trees.
Yeah. They
know.
always know when I'm driving a Zerg because we're just bouncing off of stuff. It's kind of sad, really.
Yeah. So I was
that
hoping
yellow
to get...
thing is your collision, your thing that makes this a solid wall and does not allow someone to pass through it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And it can be whatever color it needs to be. It's just a default color, but it's clean, it's optimized, and it's been crafted to make the player react with the object in a way that feels like they would expect, while being as simple as we can get. I was hoping to get this in to the game, but we're already well into our hour here, so I'm just going to have to tease you with the image there again. See, there's the tower. I got it in earlier. It did work, but I would then place that. I probably can actually place that in Atlas, but I do want to maybe take a couple more questions before I go ahead and tease some visual effects. And I even can show how some of the visual effects are made. So I can do a twofer. So
sorry, I got me typing there. Having you work on this tower, I have a little question for you. I don't know if you know the answer or not, but I've noticed a lot of the towers in the Frontiers look like they have something carved in the bottom of them that almost looks like an initial. Are there little initials carved in there? Or is that just part of the decoration?
Well, I wouldn't put it past a artist having a moment of
slipping in a little Easter egg in there?
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I believe at some point we might have had a terrain artist who'd like to write their initials in the terrain, and you would never see it except, well, maybe in the map. So we had to squash that habit. I don't know about initials in any keeps, though. So
no, I haven't seen anything in the keeps. I've just seen it kind of at the bottom of some of the towers.
Okay, tower. So it's either something that it just looks like it. We think we see a face, but it's not really a face in the clouds. So maybe it's this case where it's not really initials, but it kind of looks like initials. Or one of the artists was having fun and they did it.
I think you may have answered that, but I obviously didn't hear it. When you're doing your artwork, where do you test that? You have it's not Pendragon. You have basically a whole different server, or what do you do?
Yeah, we have a whole different server that's an internal server, and we use that for our development cycles, and we test on there, and when things look good there, we can transition them to Pendragon, so it just gives us another development sandbox, if you will. And in this case, it's one that the outside world has no access to. And and that makes sense because we take it down constantly for builds and updates, and I wouldn't put it past anyone to crash it every once in a while. But we sandbox that for our own internal purposes. So yeah, that's a separate server.
Oh, okay. And before you show us the super secret stuff, I was wondering for you personally, what thing in the game, I don't know if there is just one thing, are you the most proud of that you have created?
Oh, wow. That's going to require me to remember what I built. I think it's going to go back to some of that catacomb stuff, because that was the last thing that I was deeply involved in. So I made the Veil sky, so the sky in the Veil. I did a lot of visual effect work back then as well. So there's that. But actually, in more recent times, let's get out of nostalgia land. I'm really, really happy with the way the light mapping turned out on the keeps and the frontiers, because for a long while they were broken. I'm sorry, they were broken. It wasn't my fault. I didn't break it. But we kind of just forgot how to do it. And so when I was lucky to be able to work on Camelot again at Broadsword, John wanted these keeps addressed, and I actually was involved with the light mapping on the keeps at New Frontier, so I remembered enough that I was able to do that. And so there's some old stuff I'm really happy with and proud of, but in the recent stuff, I'm really, really happy with the way the light mapping on the keeps turned out. It's all awesome. I love doing all of it. So you're asking me to pick my favorite
Your
child.
favorite child, yeah.
Right. And so I'm going to give you a political answer and say they're all special flowers. And
there you go.
Yeah, I think I dodged that question. So yeah.
Very well done. I've just gone up here and I see Dudor asked, are you planning on reworking some of the BG graphics and textures as well?
I'll jump in here. Yes, eventually. It's not going to be something that's done in 1.119, which is our current patch coming out in the next month or so, 2 months. But yeah, eventually we'll get to the BGs for sure, with the texture updates and maybe even some fixture updates, building updates and stuff.
Okay, and Kedel was asking, the last voice you just heard, that was John, and this voice is Luvly/Roxanne. Okay, we're ready for the sneak peeks. Dun, dun, dun.
Right. Yep. So what I am pulling up, and some screens are probably flashed by as I'm looking for something. I guess I want a sword, because everyone loves swords. So I'm going to troll through here. Not literally, but here we go. Let's just use this guy. And going to show you this. And hopefully it will play nicely. Alright, I'll pull this over to the other screen. The weapon's going to be untextured. That's just the way I work on them when I develop the visual effects. And yeah, that should be about ready to cast on over. So I developed the visual effects based upon the existing color scheme. There's going to be some minor changes to the colors that we associate with these 6 kinds of visual effects to give more. Well, 1, to make them distinctive. 2, to make the color associations the colors we really associate with those elements. And 3, to make it more awesome. And so this visual effect is for body and / pain. So it's a combination of like flashes and bubbly matter. And I could talk a little bit about how this actually is done. And then
It
I
is
think
super cool in that it's round, like little explosions off of it. That's
yeah,
really
little
neat.
like pain explosions. But we generate our particle effects inside of Max. What's a particle effect? Well, a lot of visual effects just boil down to spitting out lots of the same image in pleasing ways. So fire, which everyone's seen fire in games, can be constructed just by having a single fire image, and that gets emitted, and they're called particles because they're just little dots, like particulate matter, and we can just spam out lots of little individual fire graphics, and that's going to become what looks like a fire. And unfortunately, visual effects design it's really a magician's world, because you do this and you combine it with that, then you turn this knob right there and you get something cool. And you'll see this come up, this little blue dot, which I'm going to show you. I color this blue dot red, and then I emit it within this volume that you've been seeing. It has looks like a letter C, which is a cloud, an emission cloud. And I can control all kinds of fun things about how many of these get generated, how fast they move.
And the shape, is there specific shapes that you can draw from? That one looked very circular, and most of the glowies look like flames going straight up the weapon.
I could, put little Pac-Man faces and have little Pac-Man faces or little Space Invaders. It all boils down to a square image, but you need the image to be something that, in the case of a fantasy game like Camelot, you want things to look like sparkles and.
This looks like fireworks to me. This is just super cool. Super.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good way of thinking about it. In the same way that fireworks burst and things go everywhere, that's a lot of what particle effects do. And this is just one tool in our visual effects toolbox. The use of particle emitters to quickly create a bunch of these little shapes, and they have lifespan. So I can say I want this burst to last a few seconds or 1 second. And I want to use this graphic, and you'll see a panel I'm going to pull up here really briefly. It's not going to mean much to anybody, but for those of you who are like in the art world, you're going to be like, oh, that's cool, it's this and that. But I could say how many this emits, what direction those things go, do they grow. I'm going to make one quick change, and I'm going to wrap this demo up. I'm going to make those pain rings stinking huge, and I'm going to make lots of them. Wow. And this is going to look like, it's going to look like a hot mess, because subtlety is the key for visual effects, even though it might not seem that way. And let's just see what this does.
Because it's fun.
Oh, man. It's killing my frame rate. I might want to stop this.
So when you say you can make it grow, that can be part of the effect, so it starts off small and gets bigger?
Yes, yeah, I can.
Oh, neat.
So there's my problem. I made 2,300 particles, and that was too much. It almost broke my computer in half.
Oops.
Let's try this.
Stormwell keeps wanting it blue, but of course, Alb likes it red.
Well, I could make this blue. That's all my power. So this, I've just changed some settings, and now this looks like almost like a portal effect. But we have a lot of considerations that we have to be aware of in terms of performance, because particle effect can also, as all things artistic,
oh my gosh,
destroy your frame rate. So yeah, visual effects are awesome, and we got a lot of cool visual effects that we're working on, as John said, and I've wrapped up most of my part of that, and looking forward to testing those and getting them out to everybody. Let's see if I can close this window now.
Now, if that was, in fact, I much prefer your first effect, but if that was the effect, that would have a big effect on the game as well, right? Just being that intense, would there be lag associated with that?
Yes, absolutely. Whenever we use too many objects or too many triangles, it adversely affects the experience. So we have to balance what looks good, what feels, in terms of visual effects, volumetric, but it's not really. These have no volume to them. They're just dots in space and polygons that face the camera, but they have no actual 3D quality to them. So it's all a lot of smoke and mirrors that make visual effects work. So I'm sorry I didn't get to launch the client again and show you the tavern and the tower, but I did have time to show you visual effects, which filled into that little hole there. So I'm glad to do that.
Well, I think I certainly learned a ton. I think it's absolutely fascinating. When we sit down, we just launch the game and sit down to all this amazing stuff. And it's really interesting to see the amount of effort and artwork that goes into it. So thank you so much for being here.
Yes, you're very welcome. And perhaps if we have an opportunity, there's so much more that we weren't able to address. I know a lot of people are really fond of characters and monsters and animation, and that's a topic for another night.
It is, and I'm going to do one last question. We have Ramik, and it says, is there a particular limit to the game engine? Is there an effect that would limit the engine instead of what a person's computer could handle? So we'll make that our last question.
There are certainly limitations that the average consumer is going to have in terms of what's going to run well. In terms of limits of the engine itself, yeah, I mean there are some limits there. There are texture sizes that we cap. We could raise those caps, but we set those caps. And the way we load files, we like to cache certain files. So and that by cache I mean we load those assets in so that when you're playing the game, that the game doesn't have to load them on demand, which might affect your experience. So some things we do cache and some things we don't. And we can only cache but so much, but for the average machine's not going to have any memory left. There are certain shaders that we don't use and don't have that might be available to newer engines. So there's definitely some qualities of the engine because of its age that are limits. I can't say a 1 million polygon model won't work in the game because I probably could make it work, but again, I don't think it would work well on everyone's machine. So we can't do it.
So that's a consideration when you're doing that.
Always, it's all about the end user's experience. It's not about how fast it runs on my machine. My machine's
Right.
not that fast, which is actually good because it keeps me honest. It's about how it works for everybody else. Excuse me.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here, and thank you to everybody that tuned into our Twitch feed tonight. And we had some great questions, so thanks for all the people that were asking questions. And I think that about wraps it up. I want to remind everyone to sign up for the newsletter. Don't forget. Thanks.
See you guys.
Cheers.
Thank you so much.